Coming. Thank you very much for coming. But I've got nothing to say except to welcome bienvenue. I'm extremely grateful that you've all come. Had a wonderful, well, sort of morning, wasn't it? A couple of hours yesterday at the National Theatre School of Quebec, and met huge numbers of wonderful students, both in the French and the English section, and that was very, very exciting to meet so many young people who then, having had a dialogue, etc., then gave us two songs, impeccable, impeccable, and well, we would like refugees to be treated impeccably. So, with love, we'll come and sit down. Carla, would you like to say welcome?
Bienvenue, merci beaucoup de votre présence ici ce soir. Et j'ai un grand désir de répondre à vos questions après la projection. Et en Europe, les gens ont posé des questions très réfléchies et stimulantes. Et j'espère que vous le ferez aussi. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour ce courage et cette énergie pour porter une cause comme celle-là, d'avoir fait ce film. Et j'aimerais que vous partagiez avec elle ses commentaires, des commentaires, vous lui posiez des questions. Elle est à vous.
I'd like to quickly say thank you again to the festival, un grand merci, le Festival de Montréal, et tous les gens ici, particulièrement les jeunes et particulièrement les vieilles. Well, Paul and I, we've had some contact with Yanis Varoufakis. And of course, you know, he left the government a good while ago and has become an international celebrity. Of course, what he said was absolutely right. The first thing to do was the refugees, but the Tsipras government wasn't capable of looking after anybody, not its own people, nor the refugees, which is absolute disaster for the Greek people who've shown, as we tried to show in the film, something of their absolutely wonderful humanity in responding. But humanity can't last without any assistance, either moral assistance or, you know, energy, spiritual assistance, or literally funding assistance. You can't stay. That's the point. Colin, would you like to say something about that?
Well, yes, I mean, I agree with Mr. Varoufakis insofar as obviously what we're trying to do is help people and sustain people who feel that there is a moral obligation, as well as obviously a legal one. We've seen the treaties and the conventions that have been contravened and literally completely ignored. Going about the business of saving lives, saving children's lives, women's lives, men's lives, families. This is what this film's about, is hopefully giving people a sort of, nourishing them a little bit, giving them some support. Because, as Vanessa said, it's very easy for people who perhaps whose heart is in the right place to suddenly sort of start to feel a bit jaded about it all and indifferent, and and there's a real danger of that, of a complacency and a lack of humanity, even from people who, generally speaking, are quite good people. So, at the end of the day, it really is that about saving lives. It's not about the right wing or the left wing. It is literally that, saving life. One life saved, you're saving the entire world, as the ancient Hebrew saying goes. So I think that to us is the key point. Is there any other?
Vous avez des questions?
there is a common policy, the European Convention on Human Rights. There are other international policies, all with the categorization of being legal, law, and mandatory. On torture, on genocide, on social and economic and political rights, you name it. But there is growing, and there always will be, some tendencies that want the anarchic, individual way of standing separate. As history has taught us, this is a very dangerous way to go. Sometimes it can be very understandable, but it's a dangerous way to go. When Croatia decided to leave Yugoslavia, encouraged by all kinds of people, it was actually a reflection of what was happening behind the scenes, which was an agreement between Milosevic and Tudjman, the leader then of Croatia, to make war and split up the territories. I don't know how many people know this, but well, we all lived through it, and we organized a big event in New York, and gathered poets and playwrights, all kinds of people, again with the purpose that you were addressing, of what is the common policy. There is one. It's being broken. That's what we're trying to explain, because we haven't given a legal point by point, because that wasn't the purpose of the film. But we do belong to, support the legal organizations in the United Kingdom, like the Bar Association of Human Rights, for instance. I imagine that Montreal and Quebec have similar organizations for avocats and lawyers who are concerned with fighting the cases for human rights and to back people up. I can't personally, maybe Philippe might, maybe Carlo might, and I don't want to spend the time on Venezuela, because this isn't, you know, it's very, very important, I totally agree, but this is not what our film addresses, and so have to always try to keep discussion focused. People are so stressed with all the problems, of which Venezuela and what's happening there is one, that they can't keep their minds steady on anything, because they're so worried. That's very understandable. One of my dearest friends, well, now I'm going to get into long stories, so I'm not going to go there. We have a lot of connections. I don't know enough right now of what's happening in Venezuela, and I think you should organize a public meeting to inform people about Venezuela. I mean, I would encourage you to do so if I lived here, because I'm sure there must be people who are very concerned, as you are, about what's happening and will want to organize and get the public informed, which is really important. So I'm sorry, I won't say more than that, because I'd like to hear more of, what did you think about the film, darling? Oh, thank you.
Distributing the film, one of the best ways to really disseminate it would be through education, through schools, colleges, universities. So that's something that we're trying to target through distribution. So once that's all up and running, we're trying to do it in the United States and Canada. So once that's up and running, we definitely would want to stay in touch and see what colleges or institutions would be interested in screening the film as part of, you know, an ongoing discussion, debate on this, and of course for the educational purpose of it. So
We haven't got a distributor in Canada.
no, we don't have a Canadian distributor. We might be closing on an American one, but I don't know if that covers Canada. So we may want to see who in Canada would like to distribute this film, because I think actually that might be the best way to do it, is to actually target these kinds of universities, colleges, schools, as you were discussing, as you were saying.
Yes.
I think that would be key, because I mean I think you know, films like these, you know, just sort of throw them in a cinema or a movie theatre for a week or something, and you know, I don't really see the purpose of that. But actually going to colleges and universities, where sometimes you can have hundreds, if not even thousands, of people actually interested in the topic of the subject matter and want to discuss it, I think that to me is really productive. I think that can have a huge impact and a real ripple effect across society through young people in particular, but also older ones. Anyway, thank you very much.
We would love to help you see it, of course.
Yes, definitely, but absolutely, thank you.
In 1912, that's what I thought you said. And why were they seeking refuge from France?
Not then. At that point, they were just coming over to the New World to work, but they didn't handle it properly, just showed up, deported right away. But in 1919, it was different. Refugees, definitely.
Ah, yes, good, right, thank you. That's something to remember, because, well, the Calais is building up more refugees because people are desperate. Anyway, that's a very wonderful contribution. I know all about oral memory and not much about collective memory. But, of course, as you say, I can intuit that a film inevitably, whether it sets out to or not, incorporates collective memory. Because once Martin speaks of his family that walked all across Europe to escape the Tsar's pogroms, in the Ukraine, and finally got via Liverpool to America, well, that's part of a collective memory, which he won't be the only one to remember, but we specifically brought it out of him. And I guess that's what films can do. And that's so it's a rather wonderful moment, I think, for audience and filmmakers, when suddenly these very real lines of field energy, I would call it that, because it is wonderful how all these events, so torturous for the people who lived them or didn't survive them, or did survive them, that they must be cherished and maintained. So I spoke of oral history because I did a lot of work, good many years ago, very good many years ago, symposiums, gathering historians and people who specialized in oral memory, survivors of the Holocaust, certainly, but of many wars, precisely because there were historians coming out of the Soviet Union who hadn't been academy trained, and were cherishing the oral memories from the gulags. And those oral memories had to be preserved and cherished and maintained and saved. Vital, vital, vital. Now, as you know, Steven Spielberg set out to maintain, through his Shoah Foundation, he set out to maintain, and thanks to him, both the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. and the Imperial War Museum have filmed memories of the Holocaust survivors. Let's have another question. As to what you mean by hypocritical, because you haven't had the time to do that, and I would be very interested to hear. But, so I think that's something that's vital, obviously, for citizens of Montreal and Quebec. Are you talking about the Quebecois, or are you talking about Canadians as a whole?
Canadian as a whole.
Right. Well, there's so many distinctions, I think, aren't there, between. But that's, I think you need to let us know more about that. I have sensed there's always, one can pick up, oh, some people are very worried. I got very worried when I hear that there's some terrible prisons here.
Yes.
That to me is worse than hypocrisy, and presumably one would hope that they are getting access to lawyers. One would hope that Canadians and Quebecois and Montreal citizens are getting lawyers to go to these prisons. I've been to prisons in the United States where asylum seekers, a Chinese woman who'd been in that prison, a high security prison, she hadn't done anything, she just tried to get asylum. She'd been in there for 4 years. I went with the Women's Refugee Commission, which is based in New York. I hope and imagine you have something similar here in Montreal. The Women's Refugee Commission, because of course women do need very specifically support, very, very specifically support, and prison is the most terrible place. All the ones I visited were girls or women. None of them had done anything. But then I sense from reading the newspapers that there are people who are battling to keep attention on the human rights issue for refugees, because somebody's brought attention to the press that there was a questionnaire that police were using, which was clearly completely awful and wrong. And lots of Canadians thought it was awful and wrong, and it's been hurriedly withdrawn, or we've been promised it's not going to be used again. So thanks for being so alert, but I can't say any more about that at the moment. Only to say, I hope this film helps people keep alive and alert. Yeah. There's not much left of the nation in a lot of countries, and Syria is one of them. There is virtually nothing left of civil life in Syria. Likewise in Afghanistan. Likewise in Iraq. To deal with 3 cities and countries where I follow continually, because I'm a supporter of Médecins Sans Frontières. I'm a supporter of an Italian aid agency called Emergency, who are terrific. And I think I'm a supporter of pretty well everything else that's to do directly. Now, it's because of that that even when the daily press, the national press, forget getting much news from television, but when you don't get the news in the national press, which is virtually all the time when you're needing to know, I'm old, you're young, I can tell by your voice. You know, you can go online at the drop of a hat. I rely on Carlo. I don't know how to do this, to get what I need. But the point I'm arriving at is that I don't know, forgive me, I may have an area of misunderstanding in me. I can't quite understand why you're so concerned about what are the implications for the nations left behind if we take refugees. I see it needs to be thought about, but it should have been thought about a long time ago, and it should be thought about now, before all the major cities were bombed into oblivion. And in that bombing into oblivion, Britain's taken part, America's taken part. I don't know about Canada. I don't know. I know, well, you know that and I don't. But, I don't like to be indiscriminate in information. I feel it's very important, these days more than ever, to be quite sure one's saying how things are, as opposed to spreading generally not up-to-date information. It may well be so. I mean, pretty well every government that's got weapons and is longing to sell them is bombing these countries. We know that. It's terrifying. And I suppose because we haven't concentrated our attention on what about what's left behind, because we have to help these refugees. There is no future for those countries if we don't make sure that the refugees coming learn the language of the place that offers protection, gets jobs, maintains. I mean, one of the things I'll never forget, a wonderful singer in Bosnia, but he was famous all over Yugoslavia. His group were called Jabloko, Apple. Oh, they were so popular, so, well, they all decimated. And the leader of the group and his wife, Tanya, a fully trained nurse, almost to doctor level, working in the hospital in Sarajevo. Well, I suppose you can imagine what the hospital in Sarajevo was like in the middle of a siege that lasted something like 8 years. So they got refuge in England, but with all the restrictions that the English maintain, which is sort of, I'm sad and angry to say, fairly minimal. But his wife wasn't allowed to work. She had to have taken another series of exams through the British Medical Association to be allowed to work. Now, Britain needs nurses and needs doctors, treats them very badly and always has. But she couldn't, so they applied and came to Canada and actually came to Toronto. And that's where I met them in 2004, again. But she died. She had cancer in the brain. So I'm just telling you this because if we don't concentrate on raising the level, both the quotas, I agree, but the level of support and protection and integration for the refugees, there will never be a nation for them to go to. They are the future, wherever they are.
Je vous remercie beaucoup d'avoir été ici. Merci infiniment, Vanessa redgrave. Merci, Carlo.